Hey, Zach,
Yes.
give me the amulet, you bitch! Okay, now start the episode after that. Alright, there we go. That's your cold open. Play our music. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of another miserable podcast. I'd like to introduce us first. My name is Professor Casey. Mr. Giggleshits over there. Introduce yourself, please.
Hey guys, my name is Zach. I edit this sucker, and my hair is super shaggy right now. No haircuts for me, unfortunately.
Yeah, he looks like Charles Manson right now. Like
No,
young
that
Charles Manson.
that is not true. But also joining us, hailing from Little Rock, Arkansas, otherwise known as Mr. Chris Pistol.
I don't know this Christopher Pistol. I am Dr. Acula. I went to vampire medical school. Is this bit working?
Well, we're going with it, whether it's
I feel
working
like
or not.
we're cluing people into what we're talking about today, which we are going to examine Dracula in pop culture. And I came up with this idea because I love horror, but I love like everything about horror, like all of the stuff surrounding movies and all that. And so I figured the best way for us to get into some of the other horror stuff I love is to examine a character that everyone knows. And Dracula is one of those public domain characters that everyone knows who he is. He's iconic, but everyone also can have their own take on him. So I want you to think about Dracula, Frankenstein, Sherlock Holmes, Robin Hood, Tarzan, guys like that. Characters that no one owns now, so anyone can do anything with them. And then you'll see the broad canvas that we have to paint a picture of Dracula these days, which means all of us have different interpretations of Dracula. All of us pull different stuff to talk about. Movies, TV, all kinds of other stuff. I actually chose to stay away from movies altogether this time. And just to challenge myself a little bit. And yeah, we're going to be talking about Dracula today, but I think a good way to start off is to establish our credibility. And our listeners will know
Uh-oh.
exactly who they will sympathize with and enjoy their choices more by us telling them who our favorite Dracula of all time is.
Uh-oh.
So without explanation, we just say the name. We don't have to explain it at all because we're going to be getting into so much Dracula-y goodness that it's going to be a long episode anyway. So I am going to start by saying that my favorite Dracula of all time is the 6'8" madman known as Christopher Lee. Sir Christopher Lee.
Excellent choice.
I mean, I think I would have to agree just that his body of work, he can't really compete with Christopher Lee. If I'm going with a one-film performance of Dracula, I do love Duncan Rege's performance in The Monster Squad. It's pretty tremendous, pretty menacing. And come on, he calls a 6-year-old girl a bitch? Yeah. It's a really chilling performance. So if I'm going with one singular performance, I really do enjoy his performance. But you can't compete with Christopher Lee, man. He played Dracula in how many films, Casey?
A lot. I'm not Wikipedia. I don't fucking know.
Well, what is your Chris? Are you Christopher Lee as well, or?
I'm actually going to go rogue here. And I'm
Uh-oh.
going to say Gary Oldman in Francis Ford Coppola.
Wow.
Batshit
Gary
adaptation.
Oldman.
Batshit adaptation. Because not only does he commit to doing the Bela Lugosi voice, he plays like 4 different versions of Dracula. He plays him as a monster. He plays him old. He plays him as the pre-reincarnated Vlad the Impaler. He plays him as young, long-haired, and sexy Dracula.
That's
Plays him
true.
with boobs on his head. It's amazing. It's an amazing performance.
Bela Lugosi is rolling in his grave right now.
Yeah,
Don't worry, Bella.
because he called him Bella instead of Bela.
Bela.
It was his actual name. But
I'm sorry.
yeah, this isn't
My
Twilight,
name is
Zach.
Bela, damn it, Bela.
In fact,
Let's
we
do this,
actually
fuck.
have some ground rules to talk about. Ground rule number 1 is anyone that calls him Bella is automatically disqualified. Also, I mean, there's nothing to win. It's not a contest.
I can edit that
That's-
out, Casey. I can
Zach,
edit that out.
It's okay. I'll mention it every 30 seconds to make sure that you
I can
can't-
edit your whole track out.
If Casey had a button where he pressed it and Zach just like disappeared into like a cave underneath his chair, I think he would do it within the first.
Sorry,
Oh.
that is Casey's role on this podcast, is to call me out anytime I do the slightest and make the slightest mistake. It's his role to just shit on me as much as possible, so I'm kind
Zach-
of used to it.
The biggest mistake was starting a podcast with me. Okay, so
Well, before we get into our our
hey.
picks,
ground rules, bro. Ground rules.
okay, fine,
We gotta-
go with your ground rules.
Okay, because we don't want anything to be disqualified before we tell our choices. Okay, so it's got to be Dracula related. By that, I mean Dracula has to be one of the featured vampires in or around it, or it has to be something depicting Dracula in some way, because we didn't call this the vampire show. We called this a Dracula show. That said, Nosferatu does count, because Nosferatu was just a retelling of Dracula, the first cinematic adaptation, and the lawsuits
Nosferatu.
prove it. The reason Nosferatu's print is so scarce is because many of them were destroyed because they lost a lawsuit to Bram Stoker's estate, because the movie's a complete ripoff of Dracula, which I highly recommend reading. It's dope. It holds up. It's a fun read. It's fast. Check it out. It'll color your mind a little bit when you're looking at different Dracula adaptations, because you start picking out what pieces were in the books and which ones weren't. James Rolfe did a great video on that, actually, when he's trying to determine which Dracula was his favorite. So Zach will put a link to that in our show notes, so you can check that out. And I'm gonna try
That link
to
may or may not be there.
and I'm gonna try to make as much work for Zach in this way during the remainder of this episode, because there's at least one more video clip he's gonna have to link to.
I'll link to that other one. There's a lot of video clips, or a lot of links in these descriptions usually. So,
Okay, so Zach, what did you have to say before we got started?
did you lay out all the ground rules?
Dude, that's the ground rules, man. First
Dracula
of all,
has to be involved. Okay.
2 men enter, 1 man leaves. Dracula has to be involved.
I was gonna say, should we name just our favorite straight like Dracula film before we kind of get into our kind of offbeat depictions, or just jump into it?
Yeah, Scars of Dracula. Boom.
Scars of Dracula. I'm partial to Dracula Rises from
And I
the
think
Grave
it's
myself.
actually that's a good one. I think it might actually be Scar of Dracula, and I fucked up. Listeners, please tell me.
I think it's Scars.
Yeah, I can't remember if it's singular or plural. You think it would be plural?
So Scars and Dracula Rises from the Grave are both Christopher Lee performances, Hammer films. Chris, what about you?
My personal favorite is the Bela Lugosi Dracula.
The original?
Yeah, I think that one gets a short shrift.
Have you seen the Spanish language version?
I have. It is technically better, but it does not have Bela Lugosi. Bela
True.
Lugosi is the better Dracula.
Yeah, their Dracula's kind of like
It's a little comical.
just some dude.
Got a little overexpressive face.
He's on a
Yeah.
10 when he needs to be on about a 6. Yeah.
I feel like nowadays when people talk about the Universal movies, the Dracula kind of gets the short end because it was like the first one, so it's not like as technically impressive or as necessarily narratively as engaging as some of the other ones. But I think it has the most atmosphere. I think it has like some
It does have great atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, there's like no music in it, so that automatically makes it creepy to me. That you're just watching this like old, nearly silent film with no music. In the first like few minutes of it, where it just like shows Dracula in his castle with the brides and Renfield coming to
Some good stuff.
Renfield coming to the castle, is just so fucking great.
there's some legal issues and why it's not out in front more because Bela Lugosi's family likes money a lot,
Ah,
and anytime you use him in Dracula merchandising, they sue a lot of people to protect his image. Basically, that's why if you look at the Universal Monsters official action figures, every time in maybe the last 20 years that they've done a Dracula, it's been a generic Dracula.
but
It's
why?
very much.
Didn't he love being Dracula though?
Yeah, but they're
At
not
least,
paying the family the likeness rights, and
I
they
got you.
want the money. So this
I
has
think they
happened
sued
with
Ed Wood too.
everyone. Everyone has to pay quite a bit to use Bela Lugosi's face. So if you're doing even like as recently as the Universal Monsters board game, which I thought I had close to me, but I don't think I do. It is a very generic Dracula depicted within the game as well, despite everyone else being pretty spot on to their Universal counterparts. But you got to remember, Bela Lugosi wasn't Dracula all the time for Universal. In fact, I think John Carradine might have been Dracula way more times.
I believe Bela Lugosi only played the actual role of Dracula
Two
in a
times.
feature film twice, and I'm going to talk about one of them, not the one Chris just brought up. So,
I know.
Yeah.
I assumed it was going to be the other one.
Yeah, it's definitely the other one. So okay, Zach, since you've spoiled your
we're going to talk about. I guess since we're talking about
What it is.
Bela, yeah. I mean, I was going to ask Chris if he wanted to go first, man, but
yeah, Chris, if you want to go first, by all means.
I don't know if you've picked up on this, listener, but our roles in the podcast, so far as Zach starts the conversation, Casey chops Zach's nuts off, and I just stare in confusion. I just eat my popcorn.
you just stay classy, Chris. You just stay classy, man, the whole time.
Eat popcorn and wait for my turn to talk.
Listen to them. Children of the night. What music they make.
I am the monster the breathing men would kill. I am Dracula.
Soon, Van Helsing. Soon the creatures of the night shall rule the world. And there is no one to stop us!
Well, yeah, the most one of them, the one I wanted to shout out to was the most recent adaptation of Dracula, which is 2020's adaptation for the BBC, which is now on Netflix. And this show, it's a 3-part miniseries, basically, very similar to the Sherlock series. And it was like the Sherlock series. It was developed by Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat. I'm a big fan of these guys. Stephen Moffat, headed some of my favorite run of Doctor Who. He created, and him and Mark Gatiss both created and wrote Sherlock, which is an amazing series. So I was definitely excited to see their new Dracula series. Also, Mark Gatiss has a 3-part documentary on horror in general, which covers 3 different eras, and I think that's on YouTube, and it's definitely worth a watch.
Yeah, it's pretty
Really?
good. I have seen that one.
Yeah. The first episode in particular, where he talks about like the classic era, like Phantom of the Opera and Dracula and the Universal monster movies, is definitely worth a watching. But this new series, it's definitely kind of like Sherlock. It's definitely it's not a straight adaptation. It goes off into very wild and crazy tangents. It's instead of Van Helsing being the main antagonist, it's actually a nun named Sister Agatha Van Helsing, which I can't remember. It's been a few months since I watched it. I can't remember if they said she was like a relative of Dr. Van Helsing or not. It seemed like this is the first time that Dracula is meeting someone named Van Helsing. But Sister Agatha Van Helsing is played by Dolly Wells, and Count Dracula this time is played by, not sure if I'm pronouncing this name right, but I think it's Claes Bang, which is an interesting name.
Clay's Bang.
Claes Bang is what it says. It might be Klaus. It might be Klaus Bang. I'm not
Even
sure.
better.
Sounds like maybe it's a German name. Klaus Bang. He's actually really good. He kind of looks like Bela Lugosi, and I think he's like kind of channeling him a little bit as far as like being the more suave and seductive version of Dracula. He also kind of looks like Christopher Lee a little bit. Kind of looks like a little bit of amalgamation between the two. But he's really great. Also, he brings a little bit of humor to the role, which is very appreciative. I found the series like very interesting. It kind of starts out like it's a direct adaptation, and then it goes into different tangents throughout each episode. So like the first episode starts with Jonathan Harker coming to Dracula's castle, which is like right from the novel, but then quickly starts to depart from that as Jonathan Harker starts to turn into Dracula's minion. And then I won't say what happens in the third episode because it's a bit of a spoiler, but it definitely goes into completely different territory. Margata shows up for a little bit as Renfield, which is really fun. It's a very Stephen Moffat-y show without really saying, if I can say that without really saying specifically what that means. I guess it just means he's giving a sort of a modern, or at least like a sort of edginess or twist to it. It's really gory, so I thought that was really fun. It's got some great gore. It's got some great performances. I enjoyed it overall. I don't think I voraciously loved it as much as I loved Sherlock, so I don't know. I might wait a little while before I kind of revisit it. But I think it's definitely worth checking out, especially if you're a Dracula fan.
I will have to check it out. It's been getting very mixed reviews. People love it or hate it.
Yeah, that's why I haven't gotten around to it yet.
I think there's enough stuff in there to where I couldn't hate it. Like I definitely have some minor issues with it, particularly towards the third episode. But it gets a little sloppy. But I still think it's got some really strong stuff in it.
It definitely seemed like Hammer influenced.
And these are
visually very hammery.
90-minute episodes, right? Or 2-hour episodes, something like that.
Yeah.
And there's 3.
I think that's one of the struggles with those miniseries is that they're movies, so
yeah, basically.
Yeah, you gotta want to sit in for it.
True.
Yeah, missing a part isn't all. You can't miss a part, and you don't want to spread out watching each part too far along.
Yeah, definitely.
I have no idea what the original airing schedule was, but I remember having to wait between episodes of Sherlock, and that sucked. So, yeah.
Not very long though. I think it was only through a week or so.
Still, that's too long, man.
Casey, you want to go next? Because I think my first pick will probably lead into yours, or your pick will lead into mine.
I don't
pick
know
will lead
what
into
pick you think I'm talking about. Oh, okay, I know what one you're talking about now. Yeah, I'll do that one first. I wasn't going to. Okay. A little bit of history for you guys. A couple of my entries are going to need a little history lesson in there. So, in the 1950s, horror comic books contributed to almost getting comic books completely banned by the United States government. There was a whole big stink. There were congressional reviews and hearings and all kinds of stuff. And what arose out of that was the Comics Code Authority, which is basically like the MPAA but for comics. But instead of just giving a rating for a movie, they would say if it was approved or not. It's kind of like the Hays Code a little bit. Now, one of the things you couldn't do because horror comics contributed to this almost ban, you couldn't have horror, terror, fear, anything like that in the title of the comic. Actually, fear was cool because Daredevil was the man without fear, so that was okay. But any other variation of horror synonym you weren't allowed to use. You weren't allowed to depict werewolves, vampires, witches, supernatural stuff, zombies, anything like that. So the comics industry went a very long time without any of these monsters. Marvel tried to skirt this a little bit by coming out with Morbius, the living vampire. And Morbius is getting his own movie from Sony. You've all seen the trailers. They were very careful to call him a living vampire. He's a different kind of character. He's someone with a mutation that makes him more like a vampire bat than Count Dracula, which is probably going to be ignored in the movie, but that's the way the comic version is. But then in the 60s, Creepy Magazine came along and was very successful. So these guys got around the Comics Code by printing their horror comics as a magazine instead of a comic book, which meant black and white magazine size. Magazines are a lot bigger than a comic book. Inflated cover price. And they were super successful, and the comic companies weren't allowed to compete. So in the 70s, they relaxed the comics code after a whole lot of appeals, and all these monsters opened up. They were available now. You could do it and still get a comics code seal, because that seal would, not having a comics code seal would prevent you from most retailers ever wanting to carry your comic at the time. That's how bad the hysteria in the 50s was. So, but even 20 years later, I mean, the comics code lasted until probably around the early 2000s as far as all the companies following it. So Marvel, they're like, fuck yeah, we get to use monsters. So we get to do everything we've been wanting to do but not able to do. So first they're like, gotta have Frankenstein, right? So we're gonna have Monster of Frankenstein, which is a Frankenstein book where Frankenstein's monster is basically a superhero traveling the world, never really fits in anywhere, right? Then we're gonna have Werewolf by Night, which features a man hilariously named Jack Russell that turns into a werewolf. It's basically Incredible Hulk stories, but instead of turning into the Hulk is the misunderstood monster that is not really quite under control, it's a werewolf instead. Good book, though. And the third title they released was Tomb of Dracula, which is my choice for this week. Tomb of Dracula is probably my favorite comic of all time. It was pretty groundbreaking. This actually ran up until early 1980, so this comic ended before I was born, but I'm a huge fan nonetheless. There's been a lot of collected editions. You can get it a bunch of different ways. It's also available on the Marvel Unlimited app. If you subscribe to that, you can read every single issue digitally for a low monthly fee. But it's a great comic, and it's one that doesn't get talked about a lot. It's about to get a lot more press because the most known character other than Dracula from Tomb of Dracula would be Blade, who debuted in the series. And Blade is getting his own Marvel movie once again, so we're going to be seeing that again. But Tomb of Dracula is a villain-centered book, right? So that was kind of unprecedented back then. Eventually Joker had his own series and a few other villains, but this is the first one. You do follow kind of like a group of people that are like Dracula's enemies, but that's characters like Frank Drake, who's his descendants. There's Quincy Harker, who is actually Jonathan Harker's son that's super, super old and in a wheelchair, but still fights vampires. And you get Rachel Van Helsing, a descendant of Van Helsing. I forget how far removed she is, who has a giant mute Sikh sidekick that he's like 7 feet tall, doesn't talk, and has a vendetta against vampires. He's pretty awesome too. So we have all these characters. Eventually Blade joins up to going after Dracula, but sometimes Dracula is depicted as the lesser of two evils. So my favorite story in this comic, and it's my favorite vampire story period, I just got to share with you guys really quick. So there's this evil witch that basically she became a witch because she was getting kind of old. Her looks were fading. She used to be a very pretty model, and she's looking for the secret of youth, so she becomes a master of the black arts. She kind of blackmails Dracula by giving him this artifact that he wants to turn her into a vampire. So eventually he's just like, you know what? Fuck it. You want to be a vampire that bad? I'll make you a vampire. Why the fuck not? You know, you'll share these mystical powers with me. Why not? What else am I going to do? I'm a vampire. I'm going to study black magic all day. Who gives a shit, right? And so he bites her. She goes out. She kills a bunch of people. She sucks their blood. And she talks to Dracula. She's like, oh, I feel great. I feel so powerful. Now, keep in mind, vampires can't see their reflections, right? So you don't know what you look like. But she looks down at her hands. She sees she still has the fucked up old lady hands. She's like, yo, so why are my hands all gross? This was supposed to make me youthful again. And he's like, basically says, you dumb bastard. Vampirism isn't retroactive. Vampirism isn't retroactive. If I bite you today, you're not going to get younger than you are today. You're only going to get as young as you were when you were bit by the vampire. Your sloppy studying of the black arts just gave you the wrong idea. And so I believe she just decides to go jump out in the sunlight instead of looking like a 50-year-old woman. It was pretty goddamn entertaining. But anyway, that is Tomb of Dracula by Marvel.
That's depressing.
Life suppressing, Zach.
So
You
there
said you had
was, so there was an adaptation of Tomb of Dracula of
a
sorts.
very loose
Loose
adaptation.
So this came out in 1980. It was an anime from the company Toei called Dracula, Sovereign of the Damned, because Tomb of Dracula wasn't a cool enough name, I guess.
Honestly, though, when I rented this as a kid, it was called Tomb of Dracula in the United States.
Oh, okay. So, like all great Dracula stories, this film takes place in Boston.
Yeah. That doesn't happen in the comic.
No.
No.
So Dracula has fled Europe because people are onto him. He's like blowing his cover.
I mean, that does happen in the comic, but I don't remember Boston being specifically part of it.
Yeah, so vampire hunters are onto him. So essentially, he has sort of a vendetta against Satan, who was the one that turned him into Dracula. And to kind of get back at him, there is a satanic cult in Boston. Of course there is, because the Celtics are from Boston, so... So, to get back at Satan, he's planning to kill the woman that they are using as a sacrifice for Satan. But he ends up falling in love with her, so he steals her away as they're about to sacrifice her to Satan. And he falls in love with her and marries her, and they eventually have a kid. This really pisses Satan off. Meanwhile, across town, just so happens also in Boston, Dracula's descendant, Frank Drake,
Frank Drake, who is in the comics, yeah.
also known as Frank Dracula.
He doesn't call himself that in the comics.
But that's purportedly what his last name is. So
Frank.
he gets
Frank Dracula.
They like see these reports on the news.
Honestly,
of, like,
Zach, if I could stop you there, it's better than Blade 3 that decided to make Frank Drake literally Dracula because Blade 3 is a piece of shit movie. You can continue, I'm sorry.
So he's at this bar and there's like these reports of vampire of kind of deaths on the news that seem to be like could be done by a vampire, and everyone's making fun of it.
And now, Zach, could you tell the audience what color vampire's skin is in this, that they should be able to stand out a little bit?
Oh gosh,
they're kind of like blue-green, right? Like
a little. I mean, the animation is very crude. Let's just say that it's not. This isn't Miyazaki or like it's you're not gonna get anything very fancy here. It's pretty crude, but that's kind of the appeal.
Toei's a great company for live action stuff.
Yes.
Not so much.
So he gets a call from one of Van Helsing's descendants, his great granddaughter Rachel, and he ends up meeting them. Yeah, and he ends up meeting them at the park, and she is wheeling this older gentleman in a wheelchair named Hans Harker, who used to
Quincy Harker in the book. They changed his name.
Yeah, so he is the son of, I forget the first name. He's the son of Van Helsing's former partner, and they both hunted Dracula together.
Jonathan Harker. Jonathan Reeves.
Harker. Yeah. So they're trying to. So they've like call him out on being Dracula's descendant, and he's like, "Oh, so you think I'm related to Dracula? Huh? This is bogus." And so they want to recruit him to help hunt down Dracula, and he's not having it. And then there's a hilarious scene where Rachel pushes Hans Harker in this wheelchair, and they try to attack Frank, and he's just like backing up continuously. And he's like trying to jab him with his cane, and so Rachel's like pushing him forward, running, and he's jabbing with his cane, and he's just like pedaling backwards. And he ends up like flying high in the air because they're trying to prove that he's like a really good martial artist, which he didn't tell them. Anyway,
now, Quincy Harker has like guns that shoot stakes and shit inside his wheelchair in the comic. Yeah.
Oh gosh, yeah. I just picture like Lawrence Fishburne playing this role or something. Eventually he joins them. He's kind of a dick. Meanwhile, they've gotten like this invitation from the cult to go. They've had a kid named Janus, which is like the worst name.
Which he does exist in the comic. Like some of this stuff does happen, but it's a little.
Yeah. So he's fallen in love with this woman named Dolores. They've had a kid named Janus, and they get an invitation from the church to bring their baby, and they're gonna like give him like Satan's powers, which Dracula is wary of, but they're like, because this cult has issues with him, but he's like, it might be good for Janus, which dumbass. So they go to the.
It might be.
Yeah, so it's been about a year since he's stolen this woman, obviously, because they had a kid. Because Satan has said we have to wait a year to enact this plan on Dracula, obviously, because it involves his son. So it ends up being a trap. The cult leader accidentally kills Dracula's son, which really pisses him off. So he kills the cult leader. And then the vampire hunters are there as well, but just kind of, they're just not doing anything important. They pretty much just dick around the whole movie. And so Dracula's son is killed. He gets really pissed and pretty much goes in hiding, leaving Dolores to kind of mourn. And eventually, Janus is resurrected by heaven into what is essentially the Aryan Captain Planet. He's brought back, I guess, to destroy Dracula for due to the crimes he committed.
You know who eventually really destroys Dracula? They all team up, like all the heroes, right? Like in the comics, they destroy Dracula, but it takes Doctor Strange, sealing him with magic to finally finish things off. Because the book got canceled before they finished it, so they had to continue it in Doctor Strange.
It's a very goofy story. I forgot the vampire hunters, Frank, Rachel, Van Helsing's granddaughter, and Hans Harker. They also have a dog named Elijah, who can sniff out vampires because he's drinking a whole bunch of holy water.
Yeah, they replaced the giant Sikh man with a dog.
So it takes lots of twists and turns. Dracula is distraught that his own son who has now been resurrected into a teenage man, and has to kill him. He ends up having a showdown with Satan, where Satan strips him of his powers essentially. Eventually, he gets his powers back, and then he has an issue with this kind of group of vampire zombies, which is a thing.
And this is all within a 90-minute movie.
Yes. Who are saying, oh, you're not in charge of us anymore because you don't have your vampiric powers anymore. So he ends up taking out the guy who was in charge. And eventually he is destroyed by Hans Harker, who tricks him and stabs him and then blows up this temple. And that's basically the movie. I just spoiled it for you, but you're not really missing much.
It's available on YouTube because it's extremely rare and worth hundreds of dollars. But I saw this as a kid.
It's weird.
I saw it as a really little kid though, because
I would say
it's a cartoon.
Go and watch 10 minutes of it. Specifically
Skip
that
around.
scene, where Rachel is pushing Hans into Frank Drake. It's hilarious.
They actually had this at the local video store when I was a kid, and I rented it thinking, oh, it's Dracula, it's a cartoon, I'll love it, and I did not. I thought it was boring as shit.
It's slow. There's a lot of dead air in between this that is not interesting. There's they get into Dracula's backstory of why Satan turned him and everything like that, but it's not that interesting.
No Hannibal King also, who is a good vampire that ends up fighting Dracula, which is a dope character too.
His backstory is pretty much the same as Nandor from What We Do in the Shadows, if you like that show.
Yeah.
That awesome. Yeah. Basically, he had the same backstory.
Well, they kind of based him on the comic version more or less.
I'm sure, yeah.
Who was actually based on Jack Palance. Actually, they thought he would make a good Dracula, so they based their comic Dracula on him. And then years later, he played Dracula in a made-for-TV Dracula movie.
Yeah. So, in short, watch What We Do in the Shadows. Dracula's not in it, but great show. Okay, Chris.
Yeah. They're making more episodes. So
that's true. I'm sure he'll show up. Chris, what else do you got for us, man?
Oh, man. Ugh. I'm trying to decide. How many more are we doing?
One or two each.
Trying to decide if I should fight for... you know what? Everybody knows about Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula. You guys know about it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
a little bit, yeah.
Go watch it if you haven't seen it. It's a crazy, crazy movie.
And as much as shit that was added into it, it's actually one of the most accurate Dracula adaptations because even though they added a bunch of shit, it has everything that's in the novel, more or less. And
it just has a fucking great cast. I mean, you got Gary Oldman, you got Anthony Hopkins as, I don't know, for my money, I think the best Van Helsing. Casey, you want to fight me on that?
Oh, Peter Cushing, man.
Okay. Peter Cushing is really good. But Anthony Hopkins is just every piece of scenery he sees in this movie, he just starts chewing at it until it's not there anymore. Richard E. Grant as Dr. Seward. You've got Tom Waits as Renfield, who's not in the movie enough, but still great.
Yeah, he should have done a lot more. Yeah.
They did so many like weird things with practical effects and like using like puppetry and just everything, like doing everything in camera. It's a fantastic movie to just watch on a big screen and just marvel at all the different stuff in it.
Triumph in visual effects.
Yeah, I'd say a triumph in visual effects. Some hilarious acting from Keanu Reeves.
Yeah.
Oh man, just him trying to do like a classic English accent it's just so beautiful. It's like
those were the best takes, Chris. Those were the best takes.
It's like watching a picture of a puppy trying to like do like business work, like a puppy with glasses like trying to type at a typewriter or a computer. It's adorable. But I also wanted to shout out, I think a great companion to that is to watch Mel Brooks's final film, Dracula Dead and Loving It.
Oh, yes.
A movie that no one likes but me.
No, dude, it is okay. I know a lot of people that love that movie. I love that movie.
I feel like if you saw it as a kid, you like it.
And also, the Universal release of Dracula on Blu-ray includes a commentary by the filmmakers of Dead and Loving It, which is amazing.
Yeah, that is fantastic. Oh man, I mean, it's not the strongest Mel Brooks movie. It's not like in the top 5, maybe.
It's not the strongest Leslie Nielsen movie either, but
not the strongest Leslie Nielsen comedy, but it's got some great gags in it.
It's pretty fun.
It's both ripping on. It only rips on I feel like the Francis Ford Coppola Dracula a little bit. It's mostly going for the Bela Lugosi Dracula. I feel like. I'm guessing that Mel Brooks probably wanted to do this in black and white, like he did Young Frankenstein, and that probably would have been a better approach. But I'm sure the studio just said no. I have no idea if this is true or not, but I could just imagine the studio in the '90s being like, "Hell no, we're not doing it in black and white."
In the Bram Stoker's Dracula stuff felt very tacked on, but it was also like the whole commercial for the movie.
Yeah, it felt like they were in production when that movie came out, so they're just like, "Oh, let's throw this in there. Oh, let's throw that."
We got to make his head look like a butt.
Yeah. But also just Peter McNichol in this as Renfield. He's as much as I love the other performances as Renfield in the Bela Lugosi version and the Coppola version. When I think of Renfield, I think of Peter McNichol being ridiculous and throwing himself around rooms.
He is so great. It didn't look like it was the most pleasant scene to film, but he committed.
Any of them? Because he throws himself around in multiple scenes.
This is true. I'm actually looking right now to see. Okay, so apparently it is available free with ads on the Vudu video service.
Oh, okay.
But everywhere else you can just rent it.
Okay. My girlfriend's actually been wanting to rewatch this movie or wanting to watch this movie because I just showed her.
I don't know why the fuck I don't have this on Blu-ray. I need to.
I don't know if it's on Blu-ray actually.
Oh, that is
Dracula Dead and Loving It's not on Blu-ray?
Yeah.
Really?
11% on Rotten Tomato. People are fucking assholes.
Yeah, this movie gets no love. And I feel like if he had gotten to do it a little bit more closely to how Young Frankenstein was done, with doing it in black and white and maybe doing it a little bit bigger budget, or at least, I don't know. It definitely looks like it's a very, very cheap looking movie. It's like all the sets look very much like sets. It looks like a Mad TV like sketch for a lot of it.
Okay, so it is not available on Blu-ray, but if you rent it on Amazon, you can get an HD transfer of it. So
okay, that might be worth it then.
Yeah, it's only $12 to own it.
Steven Weber, who's actually really great at comedy but hardly ever gets to do it. He's great in it as Jonathan Harker.
It's so well done, and I think it's funny. I think like if you're gonna shit on a Leslie Nielsen movie, shit on Repossessed or something. This is so much better.
So yeah, check out Dracula Dead and Loving It. Don't listen to that.
Yes, wholeheartedly, and then watch the commentary on Dracula. Oh, it's It's actually pretty good stuff and insightful. It's not just like a funny commentary.
Or at least look up the scene on YouTube where Peter McNichol is eating bugs at the dinner table. It's the funniest shit you'll ever see.
Oh,
Like,
No,
man,
Renfield,
you're eating
Renfield is a
from the ground.
hilarious. Like, he's a hilarious character all the time because he's always so over the top. He's gonna make you laugh in pretty much any movie he's in.
Oh yeah, and that's the great thing. Peter McNichol is totally doing the. What's the actor who played Renfield in the Bram Stoker Dracula, or not the Bram Stoker, in the Bela Lugosi Dracula?
I am completely drawing a blank. I am
Drawing a blank as
horrible
well,
with
but he's
actors' names.
fantastic. But he's totally like riffing on that performance, and just making it even more over the top than it already was.
I say watch Dracula Dead and Loving It and pair it with Sundown, the Vampire in Retreat. Great double feature right there.
I have not seen that movie.
You have not seen Sundown, the Vampire in Retreat?
No. How about we talk about Once Bitten instead? I've seen that. That movie sucks. Don't watch it.
It does.
But the
Unless you wanted
theme
to see
song
what
is,
Jim Carrey looked like in high school.
yeah, the theme song is dope though.
So you have not seen the greatest Dracula, David Carradine.
I have seen John Carradine, who was a pretty good Dracula.
Dwight
I have not
Frye
seen-
played Renfield in the Bela Lugosi Dracula.
Dwight from The Office as
There you go.
Renfield. I can see it.
All right, Casey,
Ray
what's your
Wilson.
what do you got next up, man?
Oh, I didn't know it was my turn,
It is
Zach.
your turn, yeah.
Okay, so this other one, okay, I wanted to go outside the box on this episode. I wanted to get as weird and fucking obscure as I can.
Oh,
So
gosh.
I got pretty fucking weird and obscure. Zach, you saw what I'm talking about. Do you agree?
Oh, it's fucking weird.
Okay, so, all right, little bit of a history thing again. Okay, I told you multiple of these entries are gonna need it. Okay, so, professional wrestling is a worldwide
You've
endeavor.
already lost Chris.
But
It's okay, because I'll get him back, especially if he sees this clip. So professional wrestling is a worldwide endeavor. It's evolved in separate countries in different places around the world, but there's always been kind of like a contact with foreigners kept that make other countries' wrestling still kind of similar to what we see in North America. Yes, Mexican wrestling and Japanese wrestling is different, but it still borrows a lot from American wrestling. But there was a wrestling group in Argentina that kind of got trained and all the foreigners left. And then they just kept making a TV show because it was the most popular thing on television. And it didn't really evolve from an in-ring standpoint, but it evolved in a weirdness standpoint because it was made for kids. So what they did is we need to make the good guys things kids are scared, things kids alike. We need to make the bad guys things kids are scared of, right? So this is a wrestling group called Titanes en el Ring, Titans in the Ring, okay? Their main bad guy, their main heel was a mummy, for example. So clearly Argentina has a shitty taste in monsters. But lucky for us, there was a Chilean ripoff called Titanes del Ring, Titans of the Ring. Not in the ring, of the ring. And I've been talking to people trying to figure out if this was just a knockoff or if it was people actually that worked with the original show taking it on the road to Chile, because Chile and Argentina are very close to each other. But I want you to picture a Roman Colosseum, okay? I'm going to paint a picture, and you're all going to want to watch this video, so Zach's going to link to it. And we're
The
gonna put it
arena
on our
was the most
Twitter and
interesting
stuff.
part by far.
No, not even close. So the arena looks like a Roman Colosseum, but it's also
cool.
a TV studio. So picture Caesar's Palace at its worst, right? Like pillars everywhere, fucking 900 screaming children surrounding a wrestling ring. Caesar's Palace usually doesn't have that. But there's also amongst the pillars a live band, okay? So the live band starts playing. This all happened in 1982. The live band starts playing the Dark Shadows theme. And doing a fucking banger of a job on the Dark Shadows theme, I might add. And Dracula makes his way to the ring with a female vampire that is only known as Dracula's woman on commentary. Okay, so
I'm sorry, I have to go write a screenplay called Dracula's Woman.
He's got a whole like warlock collar going. He has what appear to be the 25-cent vampire fangs in his mouth, and he has makeup that makes him look like the cover of any Dracula makeup kit that you might buy today. Okay, so clearly a budget promotion. So Dracula gets to the ring, and you're like wondering, oh, who is his opponent going to be in this match? Well, if you're going to fight Dracula, you might as well get another hero in public domain that no one can sue you about. So Tarzan is his opponent, led to the ring by Jane, and then the band starts playing all this fucking jungle music, but with like heavy trumpets, so it sounds like elephants are in the room and shit. Fucking amazing. He did do some elephant entrances too. And so Tarzan's this really greasy looking dude in a loincloth. Looks like he probably coated himself in a whole bottle of baby oil before he went to the ring. And he gets in the ring, and the match fucking sucks, but it's 100% watchable.
It's so bad.
It's really, really bad. Because the other thing is, like, the guys in this promotion, since people weren't coming in from other countries, they got trained probably like third or fourth hand at this point on how to wrestle. Like, they got trained by a guy who got trained by a guy who was an actual wrestler. You know what I mean? So, like, they're definitely trained in Lucha Libre style. I can tell because they're working the right side of the body and not the left, but there's no Lucha Libre to be had here. This is, Dracula wrestles like Dracula should. His entire offense is biting. And so he grabs Tarzan around the neck, starts biting him, and he does spit out a little fake blood when he does so. And then Jane is up on the apron, so he goes and bites Jane a little bit. But both of these guys kind of no-sell the vampire attacks. They don't become vampires as a result.
I gotta say, I didn't expect Dracula's finisher to be a crossbody. That was a surprise.
You know, it's the least thing it's the last thing you'd expect, because, you know, you think vampires are afraid of crosses. So why would a vampire do a flying crossbody? You wouldn't even prepare for that move. And the best part about this match is, despite doing illegal biting attacks during the match, Dracula goes over clean. He just kind of beats Tarzan like any good guy would beat someone. Kind of hits him with a crossbody, rolls him up, and pins him. I was expecting Dracula to be a bit more dastardly with how he would win the match, or maybe Tarzan win. And I was just thinking, oh, that's an interesting way to do it. But the kids and the audience were scared of Dracula. There were some blood-curdling screams when he was doing that biting attack.
It's because that Tarzan did not have the power of Phil Collins behind him, so he didn't stand a chance, Casey.
Okay, first of all, I don't know what that means because I'm an adult.
Phil Collins did the music of Tarzan, sir.
No, I know. I was pretending not to know what you meant. And so this is worth watching just for the surrealness of it all. It's like a 9-minute clip. Zach watched it. Zach was subjected to this clip. See, like, the Argentinian group is a lot weirder and a lot more fun to watch, and every once in a while people miss dives and almost die, and it's really entertaining. I think I sent you a clip of that once, Zach, too. The guy eating shit on a dive. It was pretty good stuff. But yeah, so I wanted to get obscure, so I found some pro wrestling from Chile in 1982, and I challenged my co-host to get more obscure than that.
It's not going to happen. But my next pick is pretty cool, and I'm sure you would approve, Casey. Mm-hmm. Since we're talking about Peter Cushing, since we're talking about Hammer, how do you feel about Peter Cushing with Dracula and mixing it with Kung Fu, gentlemen?
I feel like it's not really Dracula in this movie, but it is.
It is Dracula. It counts. But it is not Christopher Lee playing Dracula. In this film, we get John Forbes Robertson playing Dracula. I'm not sure why Christopher Lee didn't want to do this, but...
He didn't like the script. He said no.
Christopher Lee hated everything Dracula to the point where it's amazing he ever played Dracula.
Yeah, he didn't like most of the scripts, so why not do this one? He would have, like... Honestly, Dracula's only in this for a few scenes, so...
Well,
it's not like easy money.
I don't think that was the case before. I think once they got this shitty new Dracula that looked like he was made in a dime store, they decided, hey, let's do a thing in the story where we turn him into a Chinese vampire. And so he's in disguise the whole time as a different vampire.
I didn't think he looked that bad. But so Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires came out in 1974. It's a collaboration between Hammer and the Shaw Brothers, Hong Kong production company.
Shaw Brothers, legends of martial arts
Yes.
films, makers of the greatest martial arts films that ever were. And I have nothing but respect and love for them.
So I definitely picked up some kind of... This film has some Big Trouble in Little China vibes. I have a feeling Carpenter probably was influenced a bit by this movie, among other things.
Honestly, I'd say this is the most visually interesting depiction of Dracula, including Bram Stoker's Dracula. I don't mean like Dracula himself. Like, I just mean this is like a really visually interesting movie.
It is. So...
And the aesthetic is dope.
So it starts out in Transylvania, and this monk comes to Dracula and asks him to help restore the power of the Temple of the Seven Golden Vampires, they kind of rule over this like small village in China.
Yeah.
And Dracula's like, sure, but I'm going to take your freaking body to do it. He takes his form and kills this guy. And then we cut to Peter Cushing, who is a professor in China, and he's giving a lecture on vampiric legends of China. And of his class, as the dicks they are, don't believe him. And it's Peter Cushing. You should just believe anything he's telling you, but they don't.
I don't know. He said that we shouldn't evacuate in our time of triumph.
So he tells of this legend about one who tried to stand up to these seven golden vampires, and in this legend he kills one of the golden vampires, but six still remain. It turns out one of the students in this class is a descendant of that person, and he asked Peter Cushing to accompany him to defeat these vampires, essentially. We also meet...
And these vampires are dope looking.
Yeah.
Like, they're fucking cool. Yeah.
So we have also Peter Cushing's son is in this, and he befriends this widow who has a lot of money, and she funds this expedition. So it's Peter Cushing, his son, this widow, who you think is going to get involved with Peter Cushing's son, but no. This student who is kind of like the lead hero martial artist guy. And then seven warriors who are all trained in various martial arts and pretty much just have a different weapon, essentially. Mm-hmm. And they go on this expedition, and lots of kung fu shit happens on the way. They fight different people who are trying to stop them, and they eventually come upon the vampires. And there's some really great fight scenes. And the awesome thing is Peter Cushing does get involved a few times, like swinging like a torch and stuff.
Yeah, very slowly and gingerly moving.
And the vampires are also accompanied by, there's like these kind of zombie minions with like these sort of like, I don't know if it's like kabuki masks or something that they have
like
on.
a skull face.
Yeah.
They're really cool.
There's some fights in like caverns and stuff, and they have like these golden bat like necklaces and
it's basically the Lily Munster necklace.
The vampires are trying to get hold of one that Peter Cushing and his company have, because if they get it, they can resurrect the seventh vampire that was destroyed, but that never happens. Anyway, I won't spoil everything, but a really fun movie. Some great artwork, as Casey is showing on his phone right now, which you cannot see.
No, I'm actually showing you a custom golden vampire action figure.
Oh, action figure, even better.
So what makes the vampires golden?
They wear golden masks.
They wear golden masks, yeah.
Oh, they're not dipped in liquid gold?
No, look, they're like all blinged out and shit.
Well, that's unfortunate.
But it's not too long. It's like 80 minutes tops.
Actually,
it's fun.
Chris, they like peeing on each other, and that's why they're called.
So that was my second thought.
Legend of the Seven Golden
Showers. The golden showers. Yes.
Oh gosh, that was. We're way too immature. Okay, but yes, Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires. Peter Cushing and Kung Fu. Peter Cushing and Kung Fu. Come on, guys.
Yeah, I mean, the aesthetic of this movie is off the fucking chizane, as the kids say.
It's really easy watch. Grab some popcorn. It's fun. So that was my pick.
And I do want to show Chris Zach's idea of not a bad Dracula.
His acting isn't bad. The look isn't great. He's wearing lipstick. Let's be fair.
He looks like B. Arthur's like slightly older brother.
He does a fine job performance-wise. He's just they could have made him up better.
They also painted like
twin brother.
They painted like skin eyebrows above his eyebrows, like it's supposed to be the indentations on the forehead, but they follow the eyebrow pattern, so it looks like he has two pairs of eyebrows.
All right, Chris, what's your next pick, man?
I has no next pick.
You has no next pick. Okay, fair enough.
I thought we were just doing two, so I talked briefly about Bram
I
Stoker.
have one more thing I could talk about.
Yeah, me too. I got one.
All
I
right,
got another.
Casey, what do you got?
Okay, so we wouldn't be another miserable podcast without a miserable pile of secrets. We wouldn't be a miserable pile of secrets without Castlevania. Castlevania, which is known in Japan as Akumajo Dracula, which is Demon Castle Dracula. So I'm not talking about the great Castlevania games right now. I'm not talking about ones that you may have played. A couple of you might have played this. I am talking about the game known as Kid Dracula.
It's Little Dracula,
Also,
isn't it?
No, this is Kid Dracula.
Oh,
Completely
okay.
different.
All right.
So this is made by Konami, and it is part of the Castlevania series. It was just never released here. Okay. And so what they decided to do recently, there was a Castlevania Anniversary Collection, and they localized the game in English for the first time. And in doing so, they translated the story, which I'm going to hit you with right now. Okay, so
Oh man.
one day, Kid Dracula arises from 10,000 years of slumber. A can of tomato juice in his hand, Kid Dracula was enjoying TV for the first in 10,000 years when out of the blue, one of his servant bats suddenly bites his head. What the fang is going on here? What are you doing to me? Don't you know that I am the king of this world, Kid Dracula? Hurrah for Garamoth, screamed the bat. The bat then fainted, leaving Kid Dracula in complete confusion. And then, boom, a big scary demon appeared on the TV screen. I conquered the demon realm while you were sleeping like a log. You shall call me the Demon King Garamoth from now on. So Kid Dracula goes out to fight Demon King Garamoth by stealing his dad's cape and going out and fighting in the name of Dracula. So this is like a cutesy 2D platformer, right? But Dracula is the main character. Or I guess more accurately, this should be Alucard, but they don't call him that. They just call him Kid Dracula because they do reference him taking his dad's cape. So you're a vampire that goes around shooting fireballs at different monsters. And they're all drawn in kind of like a cutesy, not scary style. So you get like little bug-eyed zombies. You get a Frankenstein's monster that has a pretty little bow at his hair for some reason. Looks kind of hilarious. You get witches that look like they're pooping on you, but I think they're supposed to be throwing crystal balls at you. And
No, that's poop. That's poop, dude.
8-bit Nintendo graphics, anything can be poop, you know? And you start to see why it might not have been released here, because the boss of the first level is a spooky ghost that looks way too much like a KKK member. Like, way too much. And
This isn't the Dracula game that was made specifically to advertise Reebok pump shoes, right?
no, that was
That's a thing that exists.
Yeah,
James
that,
Rolfe, AVGN covered
I
that.
believe
but-
that's Drac Attack. Because this isn't that game for sure. So anyway, Kid Dracula, you're fighting this ghost that looks too much like a KKK member, right? And he's about the size of you. So you hit him a bunch of times with your fireballs, and then he starts crying and runs off the screen. And then a bigger ghost comes to kick your ass, like his big brother. And so you kick that ghost's ass, and it goes crying off the screen. And I was so waiting for like a third giant ghost to come in, and it didn't happen. I was a little disappointed. So that's one strike against it. Clans member ghosts. Not good for a US audience. Second is that the game is hard as fuck. Like, I could not get past the second level, but I mean, I've really only played it a couple hours. But there are some precision jumping. Zach, what do I hate in video games?
Precision jumping.
Exactly. And this is some of the most precision jumping with the floatiest, shittiest controls that you could imagine. Like, Castlevania has some pretty tight jumps you have to do, but the controls are super precise and it's doable. It's just hard. This, you're fighting the controls and the jumps at the same time, so it's a little difficult. But it's worth seeing just for the character designs. They're really fun, really whimsical. The music's great. It's like happy, almost 50s bebop versions of Castlevania theme songs from other games.
Oh, cool.
So it's like really cool. And I recommend checking it out if you get that. If you get that anniversary collection, which is on PS4, Xbox, Switch, PC, you can't do any wrong anyway because it has all the NES Castlevania games plus Super Castlevania and Castlevania Bloodlines plus Kid Dracula that was never released here. So you'll find something good in any of those games. If you think Kid Dracula sucks, which you probably will, but I think it's worth it just to see how funny some of the sprites are and to play something that we never got to play in 1990 when it was originally released, unless you grew up in Japan.
Awesome. All right, so we spoke, I mentioned earlier that Bela Lugosi only appeared as Dracula in 2 movies. Dracula, the original 1931 classic, and this film, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, which came out in 1948. This movie is just a lot of fun. Honestly, it's a great introduction to all the Universal monsters outside of the Mummy, really.
Well, Mummy got his own movie with Abbott and Costello.
Yeah. Well, this is just, it's so much fun. Bela Lugosi clearly is having a good time here. He's much older. This was 18 years after the original Dracula, so he was like in his mid-60s here. So basically, Abbott and Costello, they work at like a post office or shipping company of sorts. And this man is he has bought the corpse of Dracula and Frankenstein supposedly for his like exhibit. Yeah, for his he has a House of Horrors exhibit, and he asked them to deliver it to his museum and put him there.
He's basically got like a roadside attraction tourist trap, and it's awesome. And I wish we could go there right now.
It looks kind of like House of Wax kind of thing. Mm-hmm. It's awesome. Yeah, so they try to load these crates in to this museum, and probably one of the best scenes in the movie is every time Abbott steps away and Costello is like reading this, there's like this little legend about Dracula that he's reading. Every time he does, something spooky happens, like a candle moves, the crate opens, and he just like freaks out every single time. And Abbott is playing the role of Wilbur in this, or Abbott is playing the role of Chip. Costello is playing the role of Wilbur. Abbott is the straight man. Chip is the comedic relief. And it's just so much fun. And you can just tell that Bela is having such a good time doing this role. He really like hams it up with the Dracula. And this, he's like, he's totally doing the whole cape to the face and just going full out Dracula here. Like all the, cliches, but he's just going for it. And it's great. And Boris Karloff. Yeah. Go for
Abbott and Costello meet the Invisible Man as well.
Yes, which is teased at the end of this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Surprisingly,
and some other stuff.
Surprisingly, Boris Karloff declined this film, but he does appear in an Abbott and Costello movie. Abbott and Costello meet the killer Boris Karloff. So I don't know why he didn't want to do this one, but
top billing, dude.
Yeah.
Top billing.
Yeah, he wanted name in the title.
But Glenn,
even though Frankenstein is his character.
Yeah, Glenn Strange plays the monster in this film. He also appeared in, I think, House of Dracula and House of Frankenstein.
Yeah, Glenn Strange gets a lot of love from fans because he's pretty cool looking.
Yeah, he does a good job.
Yeah, a lot of the masks released are of him, actually. Like, if you look at, like, Frankenstein masks throughout the years, a lot of them are Glenn Strange.
Yeah, so Dracula is essentially playing the role of Dr. Frankenstein here, and he wants to revitalize Frankenstein and give him a new brain. He wants to give him Lou Costello's brain, ultimately.
Which is nice of him.
Yeah, so Costello and Abbott end up going to this masquerade ball because Costello has a couple dates, one of whom is actually working for Dracula, and the other is an insurance inspector investigating this whole thing. In the meanwhile, Lon Chaney Jr. is trying to track down Dracula as well and stop him, and Frankenstein. And he keeps turning into the Wolfman like several times during this movie. There's a scene where he asks Lou Costello to lock him in his apartment. Lou doesn't know he's a werewolf, and just like says, "Don't open it, no matter what you do." And Lou goes in there to give him a package that was delivered, and he doesn't see him. But Wolfman is like hiding in the bathroom, and he's already changed. And then Lou goes and looks at this like bowl of fruit, and he takes a fruit, And he steals it. He's like, no one's gonna know. And he walks out, and then he's like, maybe you'll notice. So he turns back and he goes back inside, like he's gonna give it back. And he's like, nah, he's not gonna notice. And meanwhile, like the Wolfman is like there, just like hiding, trying to kind of jump at him, but he just can't. It's hilarious. This movie is fantastic. I don't really want to spoil much because really you should go in. I think blind is the best way. If you haven't seen,
it's funny as shit.
Yeah, if you haven't seen Abbott and Costello, this is a great entry point. It's probably one of their best films. Probably my favorite. I think without question. There's a lot of fun cameos. It's great to see kind of Bela and Lon Chaney Jr. interact, and just a lot of fun. There's some great bat creature effects in here. Really, for the time, looks awesome. Kind of comes from like this animated kind of transition and then into Bela Lugosi, and it looks great. I highly recommend it. Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein came out in 1948. You should be able to find it in most places. There's a great box set with like all of Abbott and Costello's films if you really want to check out their stuff.
Honestly, it's in the Universal Monsters box set, which everyone should own as well. And so they're all in there also. Plus, you get all the original Universal Monster movies, so totally worth it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Indeed.
Anything else you guys want to touch on? Casey, is there anything else you wanted to dig into?
No. Did you give me the amulet, you bitch?
You asked that at the beginning of the episode. I've told you, Casey, I do not have the amulet. I have a little pin that I bought from Fright Rags. It's not actually the amulet.
Oh, well, fuck you then, Zach.
Just a shout out to the Dr. Acula joke from, originally from the Mitch Hedberg joke, and then later transcribed to Scrubs.
And I want to shout out Garlic Man from the Little Dracula cartoon, who almost was an entry that I discussed for a very long time.
Yes, I looked this up. It's a very little known BBC like cartoon. I watched one episode. It was like Little D's Halloween, and Dracula's villain is a guy that has a garlic head. And he wears like a gas mask or something. Which he has a garlic head, and he wears like a gas mask, obviously because he's garlic and he doesn't like his own stench.
And sunglasses. Hilarious.
Too. Yeah,
you're forgetting the sunglasses.
It was pretty interesting.
You know, honestly, those had action figures, and I had little Dracula who had like a cape on his back that if you pressed a button, like the bat wings would come out. And I had the Garlic Man, and they were damn good action figures.
Very cool.
Tremendous. Probably a lot of money now because it was a pretty obscure cartoon and the toy line wasn't available very long.
So that was our Dracula show. There's so much you could get into with Dracula, man, but honestly...
Shout out to Duckula, which I have never seen.
I watched the shit out of Duckula.
Of course you did. Of course you did.
He was a vegetarian. Vegetarian that liked ketchup instead of blood.
Yeah, well, thank you to Bram Stoker for creating Dracula. He is one of the iconic horror movie villains, and horror wouldn't be what it is without Dracula. So
honestly, like, look at what we've done. All right, we've had Dracula as a horror movie villain. We've had Dracula as a comedy movie villain.
Yes, yeah.
We've had him as a comic book villain. We've had him as a video game villain. We've had him as a professional wrestling villain. Versatile motherfucker, Dracula. And I absolutely love him for it. So hopefully we can do this about some of the other monsters. I would love to do a Frankenstein episode just like this.
Oh yeah, as soon as you agree to a mummy episode.
Yeah, it's never gonna happen.
No, we'll probably do a Frankenstein show at some point. All right, thank you so much.
They want me to do a mummy episode. They can throw some Patreon bucks or something.
I can talk about the multiple mummies that have appeared in Doctor Who.
That would be cool. Yeah. All right, let me
talk about Argentinian wrestling mummies.
That'd be cool. Zach says as he slits his own wrists.
I like Doctor Who. All right, let me do a social media plug, gentlemen. So please, if you haven't yet, follow us on Twitter. We're on Twitter at twitter.com/MPOSofficial. If you're not, that's twitter.com/MPOSofficial. If you don't know, MPOS stands for Miserable Pile of Secrets, which Casey mentioned earlier. That's our blog, which we just kind of update with the podcast as of now. But there is a lot of reviews and articles on there from last year. So if you want to check out our backlog. You can also find us on YouTube. If you look up Another Miserable Podcast, we're on YouTube. You can subscribe to us. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, any streaming service we're on. Guys, where can they find you? Because you guys are also on social media.
You can find me at twitter.com/Kris Pistol. the most original Twitter handle in the world.
KrisPistole. Casey, what about you, man?
You can find me on Twitter at Lucha Gringo, and if you liked my professional wrestling talk this episode, you can check me out on Mass Mats and Mayhem, which is now part of the Lucha Central Podcast Network. Wherever you find your podcasts, you can subscribe just to Mass Mats and Mayhem or all of the wonderful Lucha Central shows. You're going to want to just subscribe to mine. All right, there we go.
And you can find me on Twitter at twitter.com/Earth2McFly, Earth the number 2 McFly, or on Instagram at Earth2Zach. That's Earth the number 2 Zach. Yeah, that should just about do it. We do about 2 episodes a month. And check out our commentary, which we should have released before this, several days before this, in fact. We did a commentary for Friday the 13th, Part 4, the final chapter. This is something new we're starting, so let us know if you enjoy it. It was a lot of fun, so I definitely highly recommend checking that out. If you feel like listening to a few numbskulls talk over Friday the 13th, Part 4, we have some really good insight. We especially all the lamps in that movie.
I turned my lamp off halfway through this podcast. You didn't even notice. But you noticed all those lamps.
Yeah.
What's up with that, Zach?
Zach has lampophobia.
I do. All right, guys.
Very side of the lamp. Terrible.
Thank you for tuning in. Take it easy.